Well, a lot has been made about the Chicago Bulls' new look offense so far this season. The Bulls seem to be committed to figuring out more on the defensive side of the ball. We're going to talk a little bit about that. Plus, the Chicago Bulls have a new injury to Zach LaVine that could play out tonight against the Utah Jazz, and we're going to preview that game against the Utah Jazz. All that and more right after this.
You are now tuned in to Chicago Bulls Central, your number one place for all Chicago Bulls news and content.
What's going on, Bulls fans? Welcome to another episode of Chicago Bulls Central, your number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related. I'm the host there, Haize, but more importantly, you guys can follow the channel at Bulls Central Pod on every social media platform we happen to be on. With that being said, let's go ahead and get into this content today, y'all. And I want to start off talking about the Bulls and how they've been communicating about the defensive side of the ball. The offense, still a work in progress, right? But I do think the offense has really kind of opened some Bulls fans and maybe even the team's eyes on just how versatile this team can be offensively with the pillars that they've instilled there, but they're still working to figure it out on that defensive side of the ball. Now, let's go over the numbers real quick before we get into their comments. The Bulls right now are 10th in defensive rating in the entire NBA at 110.4 of a defensive rating. That puts them at 10th in the NBA. Now, unfortunately, they're 29th in points allowed in the paint at 56.3 points allowed in the paint per game. Now, if the Bulls find a way to be able to handle that, or get that points in the paint a little bit harder to come by other teams, you're talking about a team that could hover around 10 all year long in the defensive rating. Now, they're still allowing a lot of points per game, right? So that's why defensive rating isn't the end-all, be-all when you look at defense, right? That is a number that takes a lot of things into consideration, of course. But the Chicago Bulls are still allowing 116 points per game, which is 20th in the NBA. So they still have a lot that they need to figure out on that defensive side of the ball. And Billy Donovan goes on to explain that some. Billy Donovan says this: half your defensive rating is what teams shoot against you. And you try to look at where they're shooting from, what you're going to live with. As early as it is, I think our guys are working, but the one thing that takes a little longer to come along when you're a team that is starting to play with each other, finding a chemistry with each other, always seems that defense is a little ahead of the offense at this time of year. I try to reserve judgment. Now, what we're doing schematically, are we executing? We're looking into that. So I think that the Bulls, and it's good that Billy Donovan isn't resting on the fact that the Bulls have the 10th best defensive rating in the league, right? We've seen the Bulls defense slide over the last couple of years. While the Bulls had a top 10 defense in 2022-23 that slipped drastically in 2023-24, and then now it's sliding again, especially when you take away players like Andre Drummond, Alex Caruso, right? So the Bulls were 21st in the league in defense last year. They look to hover around that same area again this year if they can't figure out how to get the points in the paint together. And that's a huge impact because that's a more efficient shot. Now, the Bulls are kind of picking their poison, right? The last couple of years, this has been a Bulls team that has allowed huge numbers from three-point range, and the Bulls just haven't been able to match it in prior years because they weren't shooting the three ball overall themselves pretty well. Now, the Bulls haven't had that math problem yet so far into the season. I say yet because, again, very early into the season, but the Bulls are averaging the third most three-pointers in the league at 44.2, and they're hitting it at the fourth best rate in the league as well. They're making 16.8 per game. So the Bulls are shooting the three ball at a way higher efficiency. They're making it more often. So it's just things are working out better for the Bulls, who are shooting as a team 38% from the field so far this season. From the three-point line so far this season. But they're now giving up a more efficient shot in the paint. Now, something is that the Bulls are doing pretty well, even with how many points they're giving up at the paint. They're not fouling a lot. They're not allowing teams to get to the free throw line. So they're contesting well without fouling a lot, but they still got to look at getting that down quite a bit. And so the Bulls got to look at those things. We're allowing for the third least free throws per game, only 18 per game, which is only behind the New York Knicks and the Los Angeles Lakers. So that's things that you want to look at that you're kind of doing well, but you got to stop giving up the middle. Now, we don't really have the defenders that are going to stop that. We know Vucevic is not a rim protector. We have no rim protection really on this team at all. The only player that's really bringing any type of consistent rim protection is Jalen Smith. And even then, it's still not like it's not going to really change the direction of your team defensively at the rim. So the Bulls need to look at how they're going to do those things. Now, Josh Giddey also talked about the team and figuring out their identity defensively, where he said this: figuring out our defensive identity and who we are, that doesn't happen overnight. It's going to take a little bit of time. Stats are what they are. Guys can miss shots and make your defense look really good, or hit a bunch of shots and your defensive rating isn't so good. It's a give and take. I think our defense has been solid, but there have been too many times where we break down and allow guys to get confident. That was hugely evident in the game against the Brooklyn Nets, is that you allowed a player like Cam Thomas, who, if you allowed him to build some confidence, Cam Thomas will kill you, and he did for the Chicago Bulls. So it's good that this team is saying the right things, right? We need to see how they're going to change it. Of course, that comes down to Wes Unseld. And some people will say that this Bulls team is already exceeding expectations defensively, and I would tend to agree with that, right? Like, this is a team that I expected to be absolutely terrible defensively. And while they have had quarters of absolute bad defense, the starting lineup especially just does not have, the best defensive balance out there with the offense. So they're looking to outscore teams at times rather than really slow them down. Then you got your bench unit that comes in. Patrick Williams, of course, in that starting lineup, the only defensive anchor. But then Jalen Smith, Julian Phillips, Dalen Terry, Ayo Dosunmu, these bench players that are playing the most minutes off the bench for the Bulls are bring a little bit of a defensive intensity for this team for sure, right? So, that balance of offense and defense is going to be interesting to see. Our starting lineup, of course, that has played the most possessions, they have a negative point differential so far on the season, and that's going to happen, right? And you just want to leverage the other lineups, but I have a whole episode on that. You guys can go look at that episode where I dive deep into the Bulls' different lineups and what that could mean for the different looks this team could throw out as far as defensively and offensively. But it's just using those lineups a little bit more. Of course, your starting lineup is going to play the most possessions together. That shouldn't be surprising by anyone. But how you trickle in those other lineups is going to be important, and finding that balance as the game goes on. And so, you got to ask for better from certain players as well. Like, I'll say this is probably the most consistently locked in I've seen Zach LaVine on defense. He still gets blown by at times. He still has his basketball IQ at times that just is going to hurt him, right? Same with Josh Giddey. He's had times of being really active, going over screens, using his length, but again, not consistent enough yet, right? So this team has, I think, still a higher ceiling that they can go to defensively, right? They haven't capped out defensively yet, but it comes down to the execution. It comes down to the scheme. It comes down to buying into the system. It comes down to communication as well on the defensive side of the ball. So while a lot of the Bulls' season so far has been made about offense, because we've had players playing out of their mind offensively, right? We'll get into that here in a second. You got to have that balance. You got to strike that balance. You got to be able to at least play defense when it matters the most. And we've seen that kind of fluctuate here and there for the Chicago Bulls, and we'll see how that comes over time as well. But, we got to see that develop, and hopefully that it will. And, if it does, maybe we can get better out of that, and maybe we can be a better overall, more sound defensive team. That's what it really comes down to. This Bulls team has been so efficient from the three-point range and been solid enough overall offensively that if your defense can hover around, like I've said before, I don't even need them to be 10th. I'm not talking about defensive rate. I'm talking about points allowed, right? If you can be around anywhere between like 12 and 15, that's solid enough with how many offensive possessions that the Bulls are getting. They just got to tighten that up. They got to tighten those areas up. But that gets us to our next topic on today's episode that I want to talk about, and that is that this team is still very much figuring out who they are, right? And I think that, being 6 games into this season and being an NBA team and things like that, like we have a standard that we try to set with these teams that we think that is just who they are, is who they're going to be right away at the start of the season. Sometimes it takes 15, 20 games for your team identity to really kick in, right? And the Bulls right now is a team that's still figuring out that identity on both sides of the ball, right? When you look at the slow and hot start so far, we've benefited from hot starts from Zach LaVine, Nikola Vucevic, and Josh Giddey. Now, Zach's hot start looks like it's more sustainable, I would say, than the other two. Vooch, shooting what he's shooting from three-point range just probably is not sustainable, but I will say that we're seeing from Vooch otherwise, like he's shooting 50% from three right now, taking almost 5 3-pointers per game, and the Bulls have needed that, right? But he's also shooting 55% overall from the field, and he's rebounding the ball. His rebounding rate is extreme. He's averaging 21 points per game in this time as well. Like, Vooch is really, really playing really good basketball. it's a hot start. How much of it is sustainable? That's what we'll see as we go forth into the season. But there's of course questions when it comes to that. Josh Giddey, another player that's benefited from really hot three-point shooting, and you can't really expect that to maintain. I do expect his three-point shooting to still increase from what it did last year, but 47% from Josh Giddey taking 3.5 per game, that would be a huge, that's a 14, almost 15% increase than what he did last year on top of higher volume, right? So you want to pair what you've seen with the hot starts also from the slow starts, right? Because we've had slow starts as well. You look at Ayo Dosunmu. He's a player that's off to a slow start so far this season. But we've started slow start offensively. Defensively, he's been the Ayo Dosunmu that we've come to expect, right? But the slow start offensively, that he's starting to show some signs of starting to turn that around. I think that's going to be really big for this Bulls team as well, to get an Ayo that's better off the bench, right? That's as far as shooting wise and things like that, because we need that from Ayo. Look at the last game for Ayo Dosunmu, 10 points. He did that on 27% shooting. That's not good, but the 2 games prior to that, he shot the ball 75% and 50% from the field. That's kind of where we need Ayo Dosunmu to be. But he's 3 games in a row of being in double digits after having games of 8, 2, and 3 points, right? So he's starting to come along offensively, but defensively, he's always been there, right? So that's what you want to pair with as well, the slow starts and the hot starts. You also look at Julian Phillips and Dalen Terry. These are 2 players that are playing right now the most consistent minutes of their NBA career, and there's going to be some leveling out, right? There's going to be some growing pains. There's going to be some learning curves for that, especially for Dalen Terry, a player that offensively just, he tries offensively, right? And you want Dalen Terry to be able, when he has an advantage, especially to get to the rim, the slashing in the fast break. But it's really defense for Dalen Terry as well right now. He's being pretty solid at that, but he's still only averaging 9.3 minutes per game. You get to Julian Phillips, averaging 14 minutes per game, right? And him being solid, he's still only averaging 4 points, but again, solid defensively. He's not hesitating to shoot the 3 when needed, but we're going to need these players to step up, especially while Lonzo is still out for another 4 or 5 games, right? So it's again, pairing the hot starts with the slow starts. That's going to get you kind of truer to who your team actually is. And then another question kind of overhanging over this team as well is Patrick Williams. When it comes down to Patrick Williams, what he's bringing defensively is what is keeping him in games, is what's keeping him getting the minutes that he's getting, but he's in a bad slump offensively. And the question is going to continue to be with Patrick Williams is, how much longer is defense and rebounding? Because, hey, guess what, y'all? He's our third leading rebounder. Second is Josh Giddey, who's averaging 8 rebounds per game. But Patrick Williams is our 3rd leading rebounder, right? But how much longer does that defense and the rebounding and those type of things overcome for the bad shooting? And it's bad for Patrick Williams. 28% from the field and 30% from three-point range. Both the worst marks of his NBA career. Now, you would like to think that those are going to come along for Patrick Williams, right? He's doing it on 8.7 shots per game, which is actually the most of his NBA career. So he's taking shots. He's just not making the shots, right? So especially when you got guys like Julian, still got a veteran like Torrey Craig. You got a rookie like Modest Vucevic, who is still very raw, right? But Patrick Williams is going to also have to find out, and how this season ebbs and flows for Patrick Williams is also a big part of this team figuring out its identity, because, again, he does bring so much defensively for this team and what they need there, but they're still trying to figure some things out, right? So this Bulls team, through the first 2 weeks of the season, has shown some good, it's shown some bad, it's shown some outright horrible. Over 50 points allowed in the paint is crazy, right? So we still got to allow this team to really figure out who they are, and that's going to come via some ugly games. It's going to come via some beautiful games. It's going to come via some bad losses at times as well. But they're figuring it out. They're trying to get to a place of establishing themselves. And I would say this, we're closer to having an identity than we've had at any point in Billy Donovan's tenure here with the Chicago Bulls, in my opinion, right? And so as those things continue to grow and ebb and flow for you, you just got to see how they're going to work out in the long run. And so, we'll see where this team is. I still maintain, and I said this, I still have my 30 to 35 win projection for this team. But hey, test this week, test next week as well, and we'll see where this team stands up at. But we got updates yesterday, and I did kind of an emergency video on this. So Zach LaVine is questionable for today's game against the Utah Jazz. with a abductor sprain. This is a new injury for him, so this is not the AC joint or anything like that. That was in his shoulder. This is a new injury for Zach LaVine. So Zach LaVine's starting to have kind of those dicks and dings and things like that. But overall, he'll be okay, right? And he may not play today. That could play into Modest Vucevic, who was sent down to the G League, recalled 24 hours later, because if Zach LaVine is sitting, not to say that Modest Vucevic will start for Zach, but he will probably get more minutes because either Julian or Dalen or Io are going to move into that starting lineup. So this gives the Bulls an opportunity to maybe play Modest Vucevic double-digit minutes and to see what he can bring. So that's something to look forward to in this Utah Jazz game. But this game against the Utah Jazz, I cannot allow the Chicago Bulls, or I hope the Chicago Bulls do not think that they can take their foot off the gas, right? Keys to this game. Getting into the last topic for today, we're going to preview the game against the Utah Jazz. Some of the keys for the Bulls in this game is they have to avoid a slow start, right? You cannot allow a slow start, and the Jazz aren't really a team that you have to worry about that. Now, Lauri Markkanen is also questionable for today's game. He's listed as questionable. We'll see if he ends up playing or not. But the Utah Jazz are the only team in the NBA not averaging 100 points per game or more. They're the only team averaging less than 100 points per game in the entire NBA, meaning that this is a game that the Bulls should be able to avoid a slow start and double-digit deficits against, because this is just not a Utah Jazz team that's putting up a lot of points like that. Now, make no mistake about it, the Utah Jazz they still have Jordan Clarkson, they still have some players that absolutely can fill it up if need be, right? So you don't want to come in here sleeping against the Utah Jazz, but this is a game where you can start finding some of that rhythm against, right? Defensively, you need to be sound in this game. And if you're not, listen, they can carve you up, right? Now, I think Jordan Clarkson is out this game. He is listed as out. Yeah, he is. Isaiah Collier, they're listed as out. So we'll see what happens there. But that you don't want to fall asleep against this game, right? You just don't want to. Walker Kessler is a player that, while he doesn't average a whole lot of points per game, that's just not who Walker Kessler is. He is a player that if you allow him to get in rhythm, especially in pick and roll, he can start putting or make it difficult on your paint defense. And so considering that that's where the Bulls are weak at, they need to watch out for that. Also, another thing that we got to look at with this Bulls team, the Bulls are allowing 98 field goal attempts per game while only taking 91. Right now, while that's not a huge discrepancy, when you allow 7 more field goal attempts, right, you got to be efficient in the other places that you're scoring at. In the 3 ball, if the Bulls can be more efficient from 3 than the Utah Jazz, it helps create some of that distance, right? That's what the Bulls have done, but you got to be efficient with it. And if that 3-point shot is not falling early, you got to go to your actual half-court offense and move without the ball so you can get some of these guys involved, right? So seeing how the Bulls come into this defensively sound is going to be really important. I think that's a big thing to watch out for this Bulls team. And the Bulls have to play to their strengths. Right now, the Bulls are the best rebounding team in the league by far. We're also the best defensive rebounding team in the league by a large margin as well, right? So allowing and getting those defensive rebounds, that helps you get your offense set up. And Billy Donovan has talked about it since the beginning of the season. The synergy between the offense and defense is really important for this Bulls team, considering the pace they want to play at, right? So defensive rebounding is a huge part of that. And I think that's why we see such a focused effort by the Chicago Bulls to rebound as a team. That's really what the Bulls do rebounding-wise, right? We rebound as a team. And doing that allows you to take advantage of the other team's defense before they have a chance to set up. Also, the Bulls are 9th in the league in assists. Us moving the ball around is a benefit for our team. Yes, we're going to have Vooch, Zach, and Kobe who gets the lion's shares of the shots. That's going to happen. You have your every team has their balance there, but how you get the other guys involved. Josh Giddey as well, when he gets in his rhythm offensively and is scoring double-digit points, right? You're looking at Josh Giddey between 12 and 14 points. That's the sweet spot for Josh Giddey, but we've seen him do more as well. But he's more, of course, the quarterback of your offense. So you want him to be in there. And with Lonzo still being down, it comes then point guard by committee when Josh Giddey's not in there, whether it's Kobe or Io. Moving that ball around is important for this Bulls team. When you look at it, of course, Josh Giddey is leading us in assists at 6.2. Kobe White's right there at 4.3. Io DeSumo's averaging the most assists of his career at 4.2 as well. But then you're still getting 3 assists from Vooch, almost 3 assists from Zach LaVine, right? So moving that ball around is hugely important for this team. We have to do that so that the defense can't set in. Now, the Utah Jazz are a team that have sucked this year, to be quite honest, right? So yeah, there's a proclivity there to assume that the Jazz, with having no wins so far this season, being the only winless team in the NBA, that you want to be able to come into this game against Utah and you want to just be able to win. That's what the Bulls need to be able to do, is win this game. But I'm also looking at how you win this game for me, right? You're at home on your home court. You owe your home crowd a little bit. Go out and put on a show. Have fun, break it down, and let's get it done. Let's hope that the Bulls can do that today. But we'll be live here on the channel for a pregame, halftime hangout, and postgame shows all on the channel. So make sure you guys stay in tune with us for that. Hit that subscribe button. And by the way, if you're a YouTube viewer, go over on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, leave a 5-star review for us since you can't leave a review over on YouTube. And if you're a podcast listener, go over to YouTube, hit that subscribe button. Help the channel grow. But otherwise, make sure you guys are following the show at Bulls Central Pod. You can send us any feedback, questions, comments, concerns, bullscentralpod@gmail.com. Lastly, if you want to leave a text message and our voicemail for the mailbag, the number to do so, 773-270-2799. We are the number one spot for everything Chicago Bulls related, but that's thanks to you guys. And like I like to end every episode on, go Bulls. Love you guys. See you right if you can, y'all. Peace.
This has been a presentation of the Break Media.